Hello everyone, thank you for joining us on this edition of The Inside. I am Bable Jonathan. For more than 6 years, killings, destruction and other atrocities, kidnapping and abduction have been going on in the crisis-stricken northwest and southwest regions of the Republic of Cameroon. Efforts have been made by different stakeholders, including the government, to restore peace and normalcy across those two regions. In the meantime, violence, hate speech arrive across the country, with the most recent incident recorded in the south, in the central region of the Republic of Cameroon. And of course, these have been threatening the unity of the country, the peace and stability and the well-being of the people. Today we want to look at peace building, particularly what the media and journalists should be doing to enhance the process of establishing peace and of course sustainable peace in our society, in the country, and more particularly in the crisis-stricken northwest and southwest regions of the country. Meet our guest in some few seconds. Our guest today is Victor Epierre. Ngome is a veteran journalist with more than 40 years of experience. He's a civil society leader, founder and executive director of Civil Initiative for Development with Integrity CD, a non-governmental organization working to foster good governance, human rights and integrity. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me.
You're a veteran journalist, as I said earlier, former CRTist, and some of your peers, some of the people you mentored, call you the woodworker. What do you mean of that?
I'm not sure I remember exactly where that came from, but I know that it was a newsroom name. It was not just for me. We used to refer to each other, to one another, as woodworkers, people who were like get into the forest and you're felling trees, and I don't remember exactly, but eventually it came to refer more to the fact that after leaving active service, I got involved in trying to mold younger journalists, because I believe that there is no success without succession, so trying to pass on the skills and so on. And that molding is what some people tend to compare to shaping wood.
All right, shaping wood, shaping people to do well in the practice of journalism. Now, what can we say about this issue of the seniors holding the hands of the younger generation? That seems to be disappearing today.
Oh, but that's a shame. Like I said before, I don't think there is, if you do anything and do it so well that by the time you leave, there's nobody to continue, so that you can be proud that you did it so well and nobody can do it after you. That's failure for me. I think that real success is when you are able to pass on what you are doing, whatever skills you have, to pass them on. But of course, it's also a matter of getting the young people to want to learn, to be humble enough to learn. Because you can take a horse to the stream, but you can't force it to drink.
And that's where there seems to be a problem with young people, also the younger generation, not being humble enough to learn from the seniors. Once a senior tells you, no, this script is not good, you didn't write it well, he corrects it from the first word to the last word, the next time we don't come again.
They are not used to they are not used to red ink. They don't accept it, and they don't. For example, I know a radio station where I tried to mentor, and I said, you don't go into any studio without a script. For all my time that I was functioning as a journalist, whether it be in CRTV or Radio Cameroon or the BBC, I don't remember any serious journalist going into a studio without a script. Not even my bosses at the time. I mean, especially talking about the BBC. But I remember getting into real trouble with young colleagues whom I tried to mentor in the direction of writing their scripts, even if they're going to ad-lib later on. And that is a problem. So most of those people now, most of the young people tend to say, okay, that's old school. Okay, they are the Android generation and so on and so forth. Nobody stops them from being Android generation, but they should learn the ropes. They should have those things that are helping them to develop confidence in what they are doing. So it's a shame that many young people want easy fixes. They think they don't have to go through the steps that we went through. But those things made us what we were.
All right. What impact can that have, that attitude of not wanting to maybe submit, or not wanting to be humble enough to learn, but just, skipping or, going around, avoiding some steps that should normally lead you to greatness? You
immediately expose yourself to mistakes, because these are mistakes that we probably had made and learn from the mistakes other people have made and learned from. And when we try to pass the information on, the knowledge on to you, and you don't want to take it, then you make your own mistakes, and that takes away from the depth of what you're doing. And so a lot of young people, they try to do some work, but it's shallow, because in fact things are going much faster now than they are, and so on. So they need firmer feet on the ground. And many of them deprive themselves of the opportunity to be prepared for that.
Another thing that seems to be disappearing or not being accepted by many of us of the younger generation is the attitude, the habit. I always go back to the example of the Director General, the President Director General of CRTV, Charles Ndungu, whom I heard, he often took his script even to the guard, even to the security officer, to read, to look through and see if there are some mistakes. But we of today, we are kind of not really considering that aspect of getting your scripts proofread by 1, 2, 3, not necessarily people who are of the profession, even somebody who is a cleaner or even a guard.
That's stupid vanity. It's stupid vanity when you think you're so big that somebody else cannot correct your script. It's stupidity, first of all. You're exposing your own ignorance. Because normally, when you write, you're thinking and it's flowing very fast. And sometimes you think you've written something, but it's in your head. And so even if you read that script 10 times yourself, you are reading it from your head. And you might pass the same mistake 10 times. And so on. But you give it to somebody else to read it. It doesn't matter whether the person is senior or junior. And the person immediately looks at it and says, hey, what did you mean here? And that helps you. Because you're not going to acknowledge that later on. But it helps you because it makes your work closer to perfect. So it's a stupid thing for anybody to feel that they are too big to submit their work.
And anybody listening to you or watching your report on TV will not know who read your script or who didn't read.
That's right.
And so let's go further to the topic of this edition of the Inside, building peace, or peace building, the role of the media in peace building. And before we get into the issues about peace building, recently some incidents were recorded, or some happenings were recorded within the context of the Anglophone crisis in the Northwest and Southwest regions. More than 30 women taken hostage by armed men and tortured in Pabanki in the Northwest region of the country. And before that, there was a man who was killed, a bike rider who was transporting a medal from Ndop to Bamesing for the DO of Bamesing to hand over to the beneficiary, and he was taken by armed men on the way and killed. And from the video that was put on social media, we could hear the armed men saying that he's a military officer just because they saw something like Compin on the box of the medal. And then after that, there were other incidents, including some persons, some officials of the CPDM who took part in the May 20 National Day celebration, who were taken away. The women had been released already, but the others, it's not known whether they are already free. But when you look at these incidents, women, mothers, taken hostage by their sons, what is your take on that?
Again, I think it's a shame that those things are happening in this country. We may disagree on a lot of things, but we have to respect the sanctity of life. We have to respect people's rights. Okay, one thing that I'm happy about is that, okay, immediately that happens, you hear condemnation. Government is condemning it. You listen to some factions of the non-state armed groups also condemning it, and then, of course, shamefully, you hear one faction saying, taking responsibility for it, and so on and so forth. That is, I mean, finally, you have to be able to see what you want. I don't think that taking those women helps anybody. I don't think just killing people helps anybody. But, you know, one has to come to contend with the fact that in this whole thing, there's also the settlement of scores, personal scores sometimes. And all of that does not honor whatever anybody is trying to stand for. So that is why it is necessary for this thing to end, the sooner the better.
For it to be brought to an end, there are actions that are needed, and that is why I want to talk about peace building today. Government authorities have been undertaking some effort. Other persons also, civil society leaders, civil society organizations like yours, the Civil Society Initiative. Civil Society Initiative for Development and Integrity, CD, have been doing some work on the ground to be able to contribute in restoring peace and normalcy in those crisis-stricken regions. But let's go back to the drawing board to look at what is peace, because the fact that some guns have stopped talking, the gunshots no longer as before, maybe 2016, 2017, 2018, and the rate of atrocities have also reduced. And looking at this, government authorities have been saying there is peace, peace is returning. Is that peace? What is peace? What is peace in essence?
Well, one of the things I have been saying, even before this conflict got to this level, was that peace is not necessarily just the absence of war. Peace is when people are happy to go about their lives with respect to everybody else and being respected, and so when there is justice, when there is contentment, then there is peace. When there is peace, for example, because people are afraid, when I cannot say what I want to, what I feel and what I think, because I'm afraid that somebody is going to hit on me, and I sit quiet, and you say, "Oh, he's quiet," that means peace. That cannot be peace. That is peace. That carries a time bomb with it. And I think we got to where we are now with this situation in Cameroon because we pretended for a long time that we were having peace, simply because people were quiet. Okay, it got to the point where they couldn't hold it inside anymore. It's like you put a pressure pot on fire on the stove, and put the fire on there, and it gets to a point where if you don't have a valve through which the steam is going to escape, at one point the pot will explode. So peace has to be a matter of understanding. I'll give you an example. When we started thinking about this in my organization, we said, okay, Cameroon is not the only African country that is having the kind of union problem that we have. Because what we have in Cameroon today is a problem of a union gone wrong, okay, a marriage gone wrong, because of attitudes. And I said to myself, how can we learn from other people's experiences? Are there some other countries that have had similar unions that have worked peacefully? And so we looked at Senegal and Gambia. Senegal became independent, Gambia became independent, although it was very small, much smaller than former British Cameroon. It became independent, but they decided at one point to become one country by themselves. It was not any pressure from anywhere. Perhaps it was not from the people, because it seems to have been between the presidents, President Jawara and President Diouf. So they decided they had good relations and so on and so forth. And it happened that when Gambia had problems, when there was a coup attempt, the President Diouf helped to reinstate Jawara. And so because of that, they thought they could merge their countries, okay, which they did. Now, what were the terms of the merger and so on and so forth? Were those terms respected or not? But somewhere along the line, they began to feel jittery about it. And after 7 years, they decided it was not working, and they relinquished it. Okay, so that's a case where you try to get people together, and it's not working. We did the same thing. We also looked at Tanzania. You know, Tanzania is a union of the former caliphate of Zanzibar and Tanganyika. Okay, and they became one country. And part of the reason we went to Tanzania was because we wanted to learn, because we had the feeling that Tanzania was working, that the peace in Tanzania was stable and so on. So we wanted to go there and see whether there was something we could learn from there to bring back to Cameroon, because that is the role of the media, that we go out and, bring some knowledge transfer that can inform decisions that can bring peace. And we get there and we realize that Tanzania, now they have a union, they have a federation. Now it's difficult to say whether it's a federation or a confederation, because it's two-tier. Normally we know a federation to be something like, federated states, and then you have the federal state. In the case of Tanzania, they have Zanzibar as a federated state. But instead of also having the mainland as another federated state, and then you meet at the federal state level, they decided to have a federated state of Zanzibar, and then the union government is in charge of the mainland, and so on and so forth. And that created some bad feelings, and the feelings of being shortchanged, feelings of being marginalized and so on and so forth began to grow in Zanzibar, and the Zanzibaris are 99% Muslim, and so on. And so they could not talk about these things, the kind of peace we're talking about. They could not talk about it publicly. They start seeding the separation or whatever in the mosques and in the Muslim schools. So 2 years ago we went there, and we found that by the time we were leaving, the feeling was that if nothing was done, then in the next 10, 15 years, Tanzania might have the same kind of problem we're having. But as you remember, last year, the President Magufuli, died. And they decided to follow the Constitution, and the lady who was the Vice President from the island became President. So this year we decided to go back there to see if the fact that a Zanzibari is now the president is changing anything.
What did you find out?
And it's so very positive. I spent more of the time in Zanzibar, and people are happy. They're happy because they think that justice is being done. Of course, on the other side, there are people who are saying, no, she's paying too much attention to Zanzibar. But generally, they gave me the example of COVID money that was given to many of our countries for COVID, which unfortunately, in our case, a lot of people got stolen. But in that particular case, that woman used that money to build 14 state-of-the-art hospitals for Tanzania, and 4 of them in Zanzibar. So this is it. This is the kind of role that we try to play, that of going to gather some knowledge, experiences from to enrich our own, so that we can use other people's experiences to solve our problem.
From that example of Tanzania, it can be said that if there were to be an Anglophone president in Cameroon, that could change something. This is what some people have been advocating for. That could bring some positive change, even though others are saying that it's not about an Anglophone president, because an Anglophone president in the same system, governance system, would not really change anything.
It's a matter of persons also, a matter of personalities. In Tanzania, it's working because of who Madame Suluhu is, because of who she is. But it may also not work in another country, in another place. But this is one example where that kind of thing works. If, for example, you know that there's a sense of equality and a sense of equity, that's the beginning, that's a solid foundation for peace, a solid foundation for concord. But in this case, in the case of Cameroon, I think part of the complaint has always been that there is not equity and there's not equality.
The organization, the Civil Initiative for Development and Integrity, brought together journalists in Limbe on this topic of peace building, the role of the media in peace building. What triggered that meeting?
Okay, our current action has two prongs. That prong of going out to other countries to learn from their experience and then come back and suggest it to our people. Because one of the things we did was come back with that kind of knowledge and then invite leaders of civil society, including the media, churches, and so on, and share with them that experience, and then bring them to make some recommendations, which we shared with the government, shared with the non-state armed groups, and also with the diplomatic circles that have impact on our policies. We did that. Now the next part was, like we said sometime, whenever there's conflict, when there's war, the very first casualty is truth. You would hardly know, especially when lives are involved, lives are being taken, you can hardly ever get the full truth. Everybody is trying to, you do something wrong and you try to shift it to the other person, and so on and so forth. So one of the things, therefore, is for the media, for somebody to tell the truth. If we're going to solve the problem, to find a solution to the problem, then we need the truth. We cannot build peace on falsehood. And that truth, the people who are supposed to dig out the truth and disseminate it and make it known so as to inform those decisions are the media.
And that's why you brought the journalists together to be able to kind of equip them for that task. Now, before we go further, we're talking about peace building. What is it? Peace building. Is it a one-stop thing, a process?
Yeah, I mean, peace, there's nothing like permanent peace. Even in our homes, every day that rises brings its own problems and stresses the unions we have, whether it be in the family or in the tribe or wherever. There's always something happening, somebody taking something that does not belong to them, somebody not respecting somebody else's rights. So peace is something that you continue to work at every day, just exactly like we breathe.
So it's a continuous process.
It's a continuous process.
Now, how important is the role of the media in peace building in a country like Cameroon, with the situation that we have at hand in the Northwest and Southwest?
One of the observations I made, which made us begin to think of getting the media the way we are doing now, was that instead of being a part of the solution, a lot of the media has been part of the problem. Because we disseminate the kind of information that inflames, that makes makes things worse. And so we have become, from one side and the other, we become agents of propagation. We escalate the situation. But sometimes we are forced to do it. The media are forced to do that, because if you tell the truth, and the truth does not please one side, you are victimized by that side. If you tell the truth and it doesn't fit the other side, they victimize you. So sometimes we are somewhere between the devil and deep blue sea, whether you're going to be victimized by government, or you're going to be victimized by the non-state actors, and so on and so forth. And so it becomes a very delicate balancing game that we have to do, we have to play. And that is what we brought the journalists together. And the journalists themselves, the media are in dispersed ranks. And everybody does whatever they do for the purpose of survival. And so our idea was to bring the media together and say, okay, yes, we are not going to everybody speak the same language, but can we harmonize? Can we fix an objective? Can we have a common focus and a common objective, so that we move towards it and know that this is the role we are playing?
Right. And when we look at the example of Radio Milcolin,
right,
and the Rwandan side, we begin to think that from what you're saying now, it could be very risky and even more dangerous than the guns. Having media, journalists pouring fuel in the flame.
Absolutely. I mean, one person just sitting in front of a microphone like we're doing here can get a whole crowd out there running and doing damage, which one soldier with a gun here will damage just one or two things in this room. But just a word that I place here now, or you place here now, can get Douala, all of Douala, up in the streets and then destroying things and killing people. So we have a very, very important role. The bomb falls in a particular place. But you see, especially you who are of the broadcast media, meaning that you sit in one small room, but you
release words that drop
that are going all over the place.
Millions of miles away.
Yes, a place that a bullet will not reach you, your voice is reaching, and so on and so forth. So we have a very powerful tool in our hand. We have to be, and that is how big our responsibility is.
And looking at the situation of the press today in Cameroon, qualified or described by some as precarious and very uncomfortable for the practitioners. Can we really say that this issue of some of us pouring fuel in the flame can be handled in seminars like what you organized? Because after the seminar, there is knowledge that is gathered, and then there are realities on the field that may hinder the practice or the execution, or better still, the putting into use of the knowledge that is acquired in seminars like this.
Yeah, let me say, take you back to the very beginnings of my organization. One of the first things we started trying to attack, which we found as a serious impediment to our development, was corruption. And so we called journalists together for a workshop, and then we called civil society together for a workshop. We started with the media, and the idea was to create a kind of forum, even at a time when there was no internet and all of that, create a forum for journalists. We called it the media versus corruption. Okay? And we came out with a number of resolutions, a number of recommendations, and so on and so forth. But don't forget, the journalists who met there were not the owners of the media houses. The owners of the media houses had their reasons why they opened the places. They have their own concerns, which have to be, it might be money, might be some kind of ideology, and so on and so forth. And so our ethics as journalists would still be subject to what they set forth as editorial lines and so on and so forth. And so that did not go very far. Okay, so yes, and like you say, we hold these seminars to propagate knowledge, to share information so that we can improve. But we cannot accompany everybody back to their places of work. But by multiplying these kinds of things, we know, for example, that what we do is sometimes it's training of trainers. We train, my organization will soon be organizing another workshop to train people in investigative journalism and so on and so forth. And when we train those, we expect that they go back and train others. It may not be a formal training, but when you gather your news team and give them some of the ideas that you brought, that is continuous training. So it can pass on like that. But again, the environment sometimes is a problem.
All right. I want us to go to the newsstands right now. We're going to take a look at what the newspapers reported this week. Immaculate Fogui with the press review.
As reported by the Voice Weekender, abducted Northwest House of Chiefs President Von Kevin Shumetang, kidnapped on December 21st by separatist fighters, back to life 2 years after. According to municipal updates, the Fon of Bambalang was rescued by the military from separatist captivity. The Guardian Post says, as infighting over succession of late General No Pity rages, dreaded separatist General Shina Rambo surrenders in Gokitunja. Another edition of Municipal Updates reports separatist sympathizers weep as many more fighters are surrendering by dropping their arms. According to the Post Weekender, 3 years after the Gabo massacre, military outposts confiscate community water. Locals are now forced to share untreated streams with cows, goats and other animals. Even as rainy season approaches, Limba City Mayor takes measures to curb floods. The Horizon exclaims, case of the University of Boya student who died in military custody. Gendarme Boss orders investigations at last. The Post, court annuls prime ministerial decree giving 200 Sawa families land for hotel project. The paper is questioning who will compensate families whose homes were demolished. The Sun quotes the U.S. ambassador to Cameroon who says Africa matters a lot to the United States, reason why they continue supporting the nations in their fight against terrorism. Municipal update. Like President Paul Biya, Nigerian President Bola Tinubu tells international community during inauguration, peace and stability non-negotiable.
Thank you, Immaculate Fogui, for the press review. We are still with our guest, Victor Epie Ngome, veteran journalist, founder and executive director of Initiative Civil Initiative for Development and Integrity, CD. Now, what are the necessary ingredients needed for the media and journalists to be effective and efficient in their contribution to peace building?
Well, first of all, they need training. Journalists need to be trained in terms of being able to express themselves properly, because the media have one big tool, and that's words. And everything depends on how they use these words. They also need to have a knowledge of the people they are talking to.
The target audience.
The target audience. You know, in the canons of communication, we say who says what to whom, by what means, for what purpose, and with what effect. If you have all of those things mastered, you know who you're talking to, you have a mastery of what you are talking to them about, you have an objective you want to attain, and then you work and then you determine how you're going to say it, what kind of language you're going to use. And I'm not talking about English or French, I'm talking about the kind of words that you use. You have to have a mastery of the words themselves, okay? You know, for example, that there are things that you say that will turn people off. If in reporting something about the crisis, You mentioned, somebody will say, you talk to somebody on the other side and they're saying the CPDM crime syndicate. That is not language that you should use as a journalist. If some other people do not want to be called separatists, they want to be called something, they want or terrorists, and so on and so forth. You have to find a way that you can be able to, because you'll be blamed, of course, if you use tender language, more or less. You'll be blamed on the other side, but you have to look for the language that will make the person you want to talk to listen to you, so that he doesn't switch off. It's important.
All right. And then another issue that came up during that seminar in Limbe was about balancing the stories.
Yeah.
Balancing the stories. Balance is a very, very important principle or guideline as far as the practice of journalism is concerned. But from your observations and other veterans like you, some of the stories are not well balanced or not balanced at all.
I remember one time I went to Boya, and the University of Boya was a boil. Okay, and I was going in to see what was happening, and I saw them sit at the inner gate. And a whole lot of students were sitting there. And as I was going in, somebody shouted to me and said, "You are a journalist, especially from CLTV. They don't want to see you. If you go there, they will lynch you." That made me a little bit, jittery. But I decided to go on. And I was already moving, and they had seen me. What do I do now? Turn and run? If I'm going to run, these are young people, they can run and they can outrun me. So I continued. And they got up from where they were sitting and came towards me, and they were rushing. And I thought, okay, perhaps I'm in danger. But they came in, they recognized me, and they knew that this is somebody who has always told things as they are. So they surrounded me, and instead they said, "Grandfriend, talk to us. Grandfriend, talk to us." And I said, "I don't have anything to say to you. I'm coming so you talk to me." And we went somewhere into one of the halls, and they gave me an interview. They talked to me about what their problem was. Now, I could have gone home with that. I could have come and published that. But it would have been not a balanced story, because they gave their side as students. And I needed to have the administration's point of view. And so I went in to talk to the Vice Chancellor. And the Vice Chancellor said, "Have they spoken to you?" I said, "Yes." "Oh, they refuse to talk to anybody else. So if they've spoken to you, then why do you want to talk to us?" I said, "Listen, I'm coming to talk to you because if I broadcast what they have written, what they have said, then you will blame me for not balancing the story. So you give me your version of the story." And that's how we got a balanced story. So it's important to hear, because conflict means, it starts with what? Misunderstanding. So it is important in a conflict for the parties to understand one another. That means you have to listen to one another. And you might be doing whatever you're doing, and you're thinking you're doing from your own point of view, it's the best. But you probably have not seen the way this thing could have affected the other person the other way. You're angry that somebody driving past you has splashed you with mud. Until you hear from him, if perhaps at the time when he was doing that, he probably did not see the pool of water, and so on and so forth. Then you are able to understand and to take it more coolly.
Yeah,
so balancing the story is a key thing.
Yeah, and the challenges of balancing the stories there, but in the situation of conflicts like what we have in the North and Southwest regions, it's even more difficult in getting to balance all the stories.
I understand what you're saying.
There's a law that says you shouldn't talk to people who are called terrorists.
Yes, okay.
And then at the same time, the same people who are called terrorists are not brought to the table as some people have requested.
So who will talk to them?
So who will talk to them?
How would you hear them? So it's very important that those positions have to keep moving. Even the government. I do acknowledge that the government's position has been moving also, because there was a time when you did not even mention at all that there was an Anglophone problem. Okay? But they have moved, because gradually we realized that we were like burying our head in the sand, like the ostrich in the desert. When you chase an ostrich, when it runs and gets tired, it buries its head in the sand, and because it's not seeing you, it assumes that you are not seeing it. But then you can, at that moment, just catch it. So burying our heads in the sand and pretending the problem is not there cannot help. Government, I think, is learning that slowly but surely.
And do you think that if that anti-terrorism law were to be put aside, or particularly the aspect that hinders a journalist from talking to the other side in an attempt to balance his story, in order to make to publish a story that can contribute to peace building, instead of putting a one-sided story out there that will provoke more anger and even destruction from the other side? Do you think if something were to be amended in that law to enable journalists balance up their stories as far as this crisis is concerned?
Those laws for me are a sign of paranoia. Okay, it's a sign of paranoia. Government is jittery about it. They don't want people to say certain kinds of things because they would like people, but you can't determine. Anyway, people will always find, good journalists will always find a good way of saying bad things. Okay, I think I gave you an example. I gave an example of how somebody wrote to me. Some people wrote to me and told me to tell the president, the former president, to resign because they did. And I went on air and said, "Listen, folks, I'm glad that you're listening to my program, and so on and so forth. And thank you for having that much confidence in me and for the things you asked me to do. But please, why would you be asking me to tell the president to resign? Okay, you don't do that." Now, in talking to them that way, I sent their message across, but it didn't seem like I was doing that. So So the point is, to answer your question more directly, the anti-terrorism laws are a gag. They are a gag on the press. All of that is to muzzle the press, but they have to understand that there will always be a way of going around those things. So make realistic laws. Make it possible show some trust in the journalists. Give them credit for nationalism also, because they are patriots, they are Cameroonians. This war, whichever war is being fought, the divide line between the belligerents also passes through the heart of every journalist who is talking. Because at the time when you are saying that you are either on this side, what do you expect of a journalist, for example, whose person, maybe his brother or father, has been killed by one party or the other? So they are all human beings. So try to get. The state should make laws that are realistic, that are inclusive, that make the journalists also feel that they are credited with some kind of nationalistic feeling, because I don't think there's any journalist who benefits from just saying things that will break down the state or that will cause chaos and internalize this war that is taking so many lives.
And we have seen some of the press organs that are resulting from what is known as administrative tolerance, especially press, the written press,
right.
The written press, and being used as tools of propaganda, tools of scores settling between some politicians, some government members of government, and so on and so forth. This kind of cacophony, how is it impacting the efforts of the other organs that are there trying to build peace, trying to do things correctly?
This is the thing I've always been talking about. There are too many. See, under normal circumstances, if you even remove the anti-terrorism laws or whatever they are, and just normal laws in any country where people can take people to court because they have said stupid things about them, a whole lot of our journalists will be in prison. A whole lot of our media houses will close because we'll say and write a lot of irresponsible things, and because of people will go to prison because of lawsuits. Many of them would have closed because of lawsuits, and so there has to be more training of our journalists, and also a matter of gatekeeping in terms of who is a journalist and who is not a journalist, because there's a whole lot of people, especially now that we have this thing they call citizen journalism, with people who have
social media.
Yes, they have just their telephone. They are no longer having to carry big Nagras like we used to carry, big cameras like we have here. Everyone has a small phone that has a marvelous camera on it, and they can send all sorts of things. I mentioned a case where last week, 2 weeks ago, somebody came out with a video of how President Macron was apologizing to African countries and so on and so forth. And that is deep fake. I'm not saying it cannot happen, but it did not happen. Okay, so we have to be careful about those kinds of people who just say anything. That's why part of my concern as a journalist, by now I'm retired and I should be resting quiet and just drinking my coffee or my tea by little bit. But I want to be able to contribute as much as I can to bring up the new generation of journalists, so that these things can gradually be infused in our system.
Right. Now, how can the journalists, especially the journalists working in the crisis-stricken regions, contribute effectively and efficiently to peace building without falling into the trap of one side or the other, things like that?
There are always people who will say you are bought over, and if you do your job well, you'll have that from both sides. Government will hit on your fingers, and the other side will do the same. But and that's why there's a clear distinction to be made between expressing an opinion and bringing the news. If it is the news, you give it as it is, making sure the news is verified. That is true. And you stop there. If you're not capable of walking that tightrope, then just stick with the news. Don't get into opinions. Let the people who are trained and who have the capability to do that get into the area of editorializing and so on and so forth, because it's a very delicate thing. It's very delicate. So you're not expressing your opinion if somebody has been shot, and then you say, if you say armed men, we know that the person, nobody else could have shot somebody, it would be an armed person. Now, if you say suspected terrorists, you are already tilting. If you say suspected amber or whatever it is, you're already tilting. Whereas you don't have the information to be able to say that. If the person who did it is still unknown, then it's still unknown. It could be that one person is doing it and framing the other. It is not your place. If one of them has to say that they are being framed, fine. But it's not for you to say that it is this person unless you have visual proof. And even if you have visual proof, sometimes you might not be able to say if your pictures are there to show. I do remember that when I was still in CLTV, I sent a crew out to cover the University of Yaoundé when there was a student uprising and something, and the boys brought back pictures of military beating people, And I said, okay, we're going to broadcast it. And my colleagues on the other side said, no, we cannot do this. We cannot put government into difficulty. And I said, listen, this is the truth. We are not the ones putting government into difficulty. It's the military who beat people, who were putting government in difficulty, and so on and so forth. You wouldn't believe that that's why I left CRTV. I said, no, sorry, Mr. Minister. If I'm here telling people that there was absolute calm at the university, whereas there, people listening to me, people watching me are parents who have children with wounds on their bodies because of what happened there, then you're making me a fool, and I lose my credibility. And if I lose my credibility, that means I have committed professional suicide. You will, if you are not Minister of Communication tomorrow, you will go back to the university and teach. Me, this is my profession. So sometimes, but make sure that whatever you are telling, insisting on telling, is the truth.
Stay on the truth and the facts. All right, we're going to take some interviews, and after that we'll discuss more issues about peace building, and more importantly, how we can get out of this more than 6-year trouble that's killed, maimed, destroyed in the 2 English-speaking regions of the Republic of Cameroon. Stay with us.
Thanks to the professionalism of our armed forces, they were obeying the high instruction of the head of state. They have been able to take back the fun of Bambala, who is on his way coming. I would like, therefore, not only to congratulate the security service and military men that carried out the operation, but also thanks the population and all those who involve themselves freely in the process of bringing back safely the fun of Bambala to the regional assembly, to the northwest region, and to his population of Bambala. Indeed, it is coming timely to confirm that things are coming back bit by bit normally in the region, and therefore seizing the opportunity to appeal to all those that are still doubting that they should come on board, and like those who help us to bring back the fund, contribute their own quota to increase the peace that is already reigning in almost the major part of the Northwest region, by collaborating with the administrative authorities, the military services, the security services, to help us bring back long-lasting peace in this our beloved region, and accompany the head of state in the rebuilding process. It is therefore a push, a booster to the peace process that is ongoing in the region.
The mandate of the Consulate General of Nigeria here in Lagos covers education, it covers culture, and it covers trade and commerce. That's why we have a special guest, the permanent representative of the Lagos State government in charge of education. We are also having the Vice Chancellor of the University of Lagos. And this is all in a bit because we've started some MOUs between some research institutes in Nigeria and in Cameroon. And we are stressing on infectious diseases. COVID has taught us that we need to collaborate, especially with neighboring countries, in order to break the barriers that hold us down. So we will be having this, and we hope to be networking with all these research institutions so that we develop more MOUs between Cameroon and Nigerian universities and higher education. So we hope to be networking with all these research institutions so that we develop more MOUs between Cameroon and Nigerian universities and higher education. We are also networking with some of the cultural groups. So these are all the collaborations and things that we hope to achieve to foster that partnership that we hope to build between the Nigerian and the Cameroonian community. I have served in diplomatic missions in both Africa and Europe. And I've seen how other people have admired us, especially when we swipe from English to French to Pidgin, and even to our local languages. I've seen how they have admired the food that we eat, and they have told us Cameroonians have a variety of food. So I think we have a lot to be thankful for, and a lot that unites us.
Senegal has always been touted as one of the more democratic countries on the African continent. Its population, the Senegalese people, have a culture of dialogue and attachments to their freedoms. And to now see that politically motivated demonstrations have caused the lives of dozens of people, it's really unacceptable and unprecedented. I think we have to keep in mind that there are two processes moving on separate tracks. There's all the legal issues around Sonko, that's one track, but then the political issues with the presidential elections scheduled for February 2024. And in the eyes of many Senegalese, these two processes are kind of being conflated in a way that makes it difficult for them to accept the ruling of the court. Of course, there's a lot of discontent, and we can see from the size of the demonstrations that Sonko has got support which cannot be neglected even by the government of the day. Obviously, the Senegalese juries would have to interpret their own laws, but to gain popular support and adhesion to court judgment, it has to not only be fair, but to be seen as being fair by the population itself. And I think what we're seeing now in Senegal is a situation where the courts may feel that they've rendered a judgment according to Senegalese law, but where a sizable chunk of the population is feeling that that was not a fair process. And I think some reconciliation is going to happen because the status quo cannot really be allowed to endure. I would say from my standpoint that both sides seem to have really dug themselves in positions that are pretty hardlined. On the one hand, the government that is now deployed the Senegalese military into the streets, something that is also very unprecedented. And on the other hand, Sonko and his supporters who are very determined to use the streets to make their voices heard. And we've heard some of them actually going to the extreme to say that the current president should not be allowed to finish his term. And that, again, will be very unprecedented in Senegalese history. My hope, however, is that the civic leaders of Senegal, the religious leaders and civil society can step in and try to mediate between the two sides, that ultimately they're going to have to make concessions and create an enabling environment for meaningful, inclusive, credible presidential elections to take place in February 2024.
Welcome back. Now, journalists are necessary to improve trust, governance, and inclusion. These are all factors that are included in peace building. How can the journalists go on with this trust building? Because one of the issues that is at the center of the deadlock that is prevailing now in the northwest and southwest regions, despite all the efforts that is being made by the government, is distrust. And distrust between the population and the authorities, distrust the military and the authorities, the military and the population and so on, distrust. Now, how can journalists help to bridge the gap, help to create trust, help to bring up an atmosphere of trust that can help in peace building?
Well, if you're going to be trusted, then you must be delivering the truth. And it must be known that you are delivering the truth. I do remember early in the early 90s, there was a program for vaccination against hepatitis B. It was funded by, I think, UNICEF. And that program failed because somebody had sent out information had gone all over the place, that this thing was a plan to sterilize young women of childbearing age, and so on and so forth. Now, this is, somebody quickly said, okay, this is one of these theories that make conspiracy theories.
Conspiracy theories.
And UNICEF was interested in knowing why the program has failed, and they came to Cameroon and said, okay, let's have some journalists go out and investigate, but they must be journalists who are trusted. People you are sure will tell the truth, and whatever they tell, people will believe, because they have built that atmosphere of trust. And that's how I found myself being asked to go to lead a team to the northwest and to the west region for to investigate that. And when we came out with the facts, we gave what we found. We didn't give opinions, we gave facts. But this is it. So the instrument that will make the journalist has to first of all be credible. When you are credible, then you begin to build trust, because that's what it's all about. When you build trust, and then they know, for example, that you will go to the bitter end to look for the truth. Because you can tell the truth, but it could be a partial truth.
Half-truth.
Yes, it could be a half-truth, because there was some other part of the thing that your story did not answer all the questions. So people say, okay, but what about this other one? And so on and so forth. How did he know that it was this one? When you leave questions unanswered, then that trust is not there.
The trust will be...
And then attribute. Then, of course, you have to know that the journalist is not the newsmaker. The journalist talks to people who make news. Most of the things you may see are about people doing things or things happening to people. Talk to the people who are doing the things. Talk to the people to whom the things are happening. That is where you get your credibility.
Now, about good governance, we have journalists who are either in jail or they have been killed for this because they were trying to fight some ills that dampen good governance, ills like corruption, embezzlement, and they are killed in the process.
That is the problem. That is one of the inherent risks that you take. When young people join this profession, they are thinking about the glamour. They're thinking about being in front of cameras like we are now, and everybody's seeing you and you can smile, but that is not it. That's not all about journalism. The real thing is that it carries a whole lot of risks, and this is one of them you're talking about, where you can easily even lose your life. But that's the point. For the time that I was reporting for the BBC in Cameroon, it was always said that I was covering, and that's the term we use, right? That the journalist is covering an area. And my experience was that instead of covering, we spend our time trying to uncover what politicians are trying to cover. And when you make a livelihood of uncovering what powerful people want covered, then of course you have to live permanently with that risk. So, and they say when you sleep with the elephant, it is not the elephant that has to watch how you sleep. You have to watch.
All right, we're rounding up. Before we go, tell us, you talked about a workshop that will be coming up on investigative journalism.
Yeah.
What are the other things that are in perspective in terms of helping in peace building in particular, and of course good governance?
Yes, especially in the area of the media, we think that it is necessary to encourage people who try to do well. And so to encourage best practices in journalism, we are launching a probity award, if you like, an excellence in journalism award, which we are going to launch this time, and we are hoping that the journalists themselves will we're trying to get the journalists together to build a synergy that eventually can continue with this. They can resort to corporate social responsibility to fund this, so that those who are doing journalism as it's supposed to be done are identified and encouraged. And that one of the things we did during this work, during this meeting in Limbe, is that we selected a panel that would judge those inputs. And then after that, we're going to have that. We're also trying very hard, and I'm very happy that the National Council for Communication was in this with us, and we are saying the NCC is a government organ that is supposed to be helping to regulate the press. But you know that NCC itself is being regulated by the state, and so on. And we should get to the point where the journalists should be able to say something themselves, to regulate themselves also. Not to replace, but to work with NCC and to say, hey, a number of people who have been identified as professional journalists and who can say, okay, who can be called the kind of peer review team that can look at what other journalists are doing in the field and say, hey, this one you didn't do well. This one you did very well.
Kind of an auto-regulatory organ.
That's it.
Before we go, I want to get your opinion on this point that there's need to come together as a strong body that can have a greater bargaining power.
Absolutely. That is what I mentioned when I talked about synergy. And I tried to reflect it in the way I invited people to the meeting, to the conclave in Limbe. My idea is not to dismantle the unions. Okay, we have the National Union of Journalists, we have Kamasej, we have all sorts of... We're not saying they should dissolve. If they could, fine. But the thing about these unions, my observation is that most of them, like we get together and we start a union, and we are about 10 of us, and I say, I'm expecting to be president or whatever in the union because I have other things in my mind. And if I don't get what I want, the position I want, then I separate myself from there and go and create another one by myself, and so on and so on. And this is how the mushrooming of all these unions you're talking about, all these groupings that you're talking about, came about. But fine, if they can all have a common focus of making journalists responsible, of making journalists work efficiently, that's fine. But like Juan Paul was saying, it is good for us within those unions or outside of the unions to come together, identify common goals, and face them in a common and concerted manner.
Thank you very much, Victor Epie Ngome, veteran journalist and founder and executive director of Civil Initiative for Development and Integrity. Thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, dear viewers, for staying with us. That's it for today. Goodbye.